quiet on the set. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. I'm Dear Myrtle, your friend in genealogy. Welcome to a very special study of U.S. military record morning reports.
It must be very special because you're here and Mr. Mert is not taking you out to dinner. So we're honored to have you in person today.
I finally decided to come. Yes, he'll have to get me something from the drive-in. Hopefully a chocolate malt will be in the offing. Yeah, normally I'm not here on Wednesdays. But some things have been happening, and I want to tell you the genesis of tonight's presentation. I happen to be a friend of Jennifer Holik's and have seen her present at a national conference at Roots Tech, and I follow her travels over to the Netherlands and back, etc. And so I'm used to following her on Facebook. And here she is with two different gentlemen. These are World War II vets, aren't they, Jennifer?
Yes.
Couldn't be one. They'd be, I think we've lost them all by now. But then she started talking about these morning reports. Now, Cousin Russ, I'm used to 19th century U.S. military records research. Morning reports for the Civil War don't tell you. It's been fairly quiet until that time. Suddenly all our artillery batteries opened up and the soldier didn't know what to do. To medical, yeah, this was so detailed that I couldn't believe it. Let me show you this next one. And she was just, you were driving me nuts, Jennifer, because I had to find out more. And so that's why I turned to you. Let me tell you all a little bit about Jennifer. She is the founder and coordinator at World War II Research and Writing Center. She does do research services. I think a lot of what she does is this part that's showing on the screen about healing, the actual uncovering of the stories behind that, quote, World War II service record. If you're lucky, you can get it, kind of thing. And she helps people write the story. It's pretty interesting. Thanks, Cousin Russ, for sharing the link. And so with that, I asked Jennifer, could you please come talk to us about the kind of morning reports that you're looking at? And so let's all welcome Jennifer to tonight's webinar. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're glad to have you. The pictures that you shared with me, these are all things you sent to me, and I'll run the PowerPoint so you can talk.
Okay.
Previously I've studied my World War II ancestor. These are all World War II that we're looking at?
Yes.
Okay, and let me just go through some of the pictures.
Okay.
Cold winter. I have people that served in the Philippines in World War II, where it's hot.
Yes.
Muggy. That's not what they were having.
No.
Yeah, please do visit her website just to get your stuff rolling along. Cold and slushy. I don't know how their hands could handle being on that metal sled and pulling that along, bent over like that.
Well, those men were actually bringing the boats from way up high on a ridge down to the Sauer River in Luxembourg to try and cross it. This is part of the 5th Infantry Division. Yeah, they lost a lot of men trying to cross that river.
Oh, heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of the work that Jennifer does is for us to understand the day-to-day things that happened in our ancestors' lives.
Mm-hmm.
And contrary to popular belief, it wasn't all burned, was it?
No. And actually, we all know in 1973 there was the fire. 80% of the Army and the Army Air Force, OMPFs, that service file, the official military personnel file, burned. But there are so many other records that you can get, like company morning reports, which are valuable. And what we talk about today, even though we're focusing on World War II, these exist for World War I, Korea, and Vietnam. So again, when I talk about World War II research, you can use it for all 4 of those wars, the tools, the research strategies, where the records are.
Mm-hmm.
So But company morning reports are something nobody really talks about. And you can find them on National Personnel Record Center's website, but it's kind of hidden. And they don't do a very good job of explaining how to get them, which is basically you can go to St. Louis and look at the microfilm yourself, or you can hire a researcher to pull those records.
Okay, so let me go through these, and you've got some specific case studies to tell us about.
Yes.
Here we have a tank. The tanks drive Mr. Mert nuts. He just loves them. If we see one at the side of the road, we have to stop. But anyway, yeah. Sometimes we're lucky if we end up with a picture like this. It's been cross-posted maybe in our local newspaper, where our World War II ancestor lived. But this is what you can find in these additional record sets that Jennifer's talking with us about. Tell us about this major.
Well, this picture and the information that goes with it actually comes from unit records, which are held in National Archives College Park. But it's one example of this man is receiving a medal. Now, in some morning reports, it will list the names of men getting medals. Sometimes it will just say, the Purple Heart was given to 10 men in the company today, or the Silver Star was given in a ceremony and a certain general was there. And those are all clues and pieces of the puzzle that when you start to look at all of the other records, whether they're the personnel records or the unit records, you can start to find all of those things, especially if the service file burned. So this is a nice example.
So you learn a lot. You can learn a lot. And you can learn a lot about the other men in his unit and their experiences, which then informs your better understanding of your ancestor in that same company.
Exactly.
Wow.
And one record does not answer every question. It does not give you the entire service history, even if it's the service file, because you still don't have a lot of these pieces like the pictures or more of the details that we'll see coming up in the morning reports of what happened. And one of the morning reports that you showed that I posted on Facebook yesterday, where the guy was holding his cup of coffee and the shrapnel went through the bottom of the cup, he was fine. Those details you don't find in a service file. You might not see that anywhere except on a morning report, which I thought was amazing because you usually don't see that kind of detail.
Well, and I find it amazing because Mr. Mert and I were in Iowa at the State Historical Society, which is the official archives for the state. And he had specific research to do, and I felt like pulling up some military files, even though I didn't have somebody there in particular. I was waiting for Mr. Mert to put me on, photocopy duty. And I ended up pulling up a morning report, Civil War era, and all it was a list of the men, and there's a check mark if they were there that morning. And there was space toward the bottom to write in the names of people who were AWOL, people who'd been granted leave, and people who'd gone to sick bay. And then a day later, maybe on the next morning report, it would say that one of those persons that had gone to sick bay was now sent to a general hospital, which was just a farmhouse. And that's all that I basically could get from it. None of this detail. So let's dig a little bit farther into this. So this goes with that picture that I used for our logo, our branding this evening. So tell me about this.
Well, this, with the context of the information on the back, when you have the morning reports and you know where they are in Germany, and then you find a picture, it helps give you much more context and a better visualization of what their service was, because this is during the Battle of the Bulge just after the Battle of the Bulge ended, but still it was the worst winter in Northern Europe's history in decades. It was below zero most days. There was ice under the snow. The snow had been at least up to their knees at certain points, and we kind of know this, when we talk about how bad the weather was, but then to see a picture of the guys and the snow and the burst trees and all of that, it really gives you just almost gives you chills because you're almost there with them.
Totally. I wouldn't have understood that. I mean, I can consciously think of it like you're saying,
Right.
but I'm only looking at it on the surface level. I'm not
Yes.
getting that chill.
Mm-hmm.
Startling. You also included this picture. Yeah, there was no escape. You couldn't go down to the corner bar and get warm in front of the fire and have a drink.
Right.
It was not a thing you could do.
No, and this came with a tank battalion set of unit records, but it's unlabeled. So we don't know if this is Germany or Luxembourg or Belgium. But when I was in Germany in June, standing on top of a bunker that Hitler visited, there was a view very much like this,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and while the picture kind of does a little bit of justice to what the men saw or experienced, actually going there and standing where they were gives you a whole different perspective.
I imagine there's echoes of the past right there as you're standing
Yes,
there too.
a lot.
Okay, so tell me about these brothers.
Well, on the left, in the black and white picture, we have William Jones. And if any of you who are watching attended my Roots Tech Talk, or you've seen it on my website, the first one that they streamed about starting research, I told the story of William Jones. He was killed 2 days after my cousin James on 13 January 1945 during the Bulge in Tiramo, Belgium. And on the right is his brother, his younger brother, Robert, who also served in the European theater. Now, what's interesting about these two is Bill was put into service, trained, and then put into a unit, went overseas, saw combat, was killed in action. His brother had very interesting history, which we don't see very often. And that's that he was put into training, and he trained stateside for over a year. Then when he's sent overseas, he's put into like 3 or 4 different replacement depots waiting to be assigned to a combat unit. And he's not assigned to a combat unit until the middle of April 1945 into the 10th Mountain Division in Italy. He has 4 weeks of combat, and then the war is over, which I think on some level is a blessing because his oldest brother is killed in January. And Robert may or may not have known this. It depends on when his mother was notified and when she was able to get a letter to Robert and all of the different communication. You know, it just wasn't like I can go on Twitter and say, you know, he's gone.
Yeah, I get that. I can't imagine the heartbreak for the mother, the patriotism in their hearts as
Right.
they hug their boys. They're boys. You've got boys. I had girls.
Yeah.
But I have grandsons, so I can relate. If I had to hug them all goodbye and hope and pray they come back, and I lose one,
Yeah.
and the other one is in combat, and you just pray for the end of the war. The politics gets worked out. Okay, let me bring up this next slide. Tell me a little bit. Which one is Fred? Do we know?
Fred is on the bottom. He is second from the right. The really skinny guy, right?
Skinny guy right
yes,
here. Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah.
Fred is actually, well, he would have been the brother-in-law of Ginny, who is my Flying Tiger's widow.
Yes.
The Women's Army Corps woman.
Mm-hmm.
She married Fred's brother, Harvey. But Fred actually was a co-pilot on a bomber that went down 2 November 1943. And he was recovered. Actually, when the bomber went down, the Austrians found the crew. They buried them in a local cemetery, and Graves Registration disinterred them in 1946. And then Fred was brought back. Now, the Air Corps, I didn't give any examples of the Air Corps morning reports. They basically show who's coming into a squadron and who's maybe coming in, going out, wounded, killed, missing in action, POW. Maybe a small record of events, but not usually, at least what I've seen so far, the expanded record of events that we're going to see in the few slides ahead.
I have a question. It probably is not in a morning report, but what I recognize in the picture is different uniform configurations. What sticks out of my mind is the color. Yes, this is black and white, but your Fred Jones has a different headpiece than anybody else. So there's a story there somewhere that usually it distinguishes what the person's role is in that crew.
Mm-hmm.
Is if this is an aircraft crew, each one of those uniform configurations means that they're an officer or enlisted and have a different role within that aircraft.
Right.
That's like Mr. Mert does that too. You military guys think that way, Rush. You relate to those uniforms. We've got two important comments from the community that I'd like to bring in,
Okay.
representative of what heartbreak has been felt in some of our members' families. Go ahead, Russ.
Betty Lou says, I have a cousin who died in France. And Molly said, I have a second cousin got frostbitten ears in Italy in
Ooh.
World War II.
Betty Lou, did you get his individual deceased personnel file? That's the death file that would have been created for him. Even if he was repatriated and brought back and buried to the US, that file is available. And under education on my website, in education articles, there are some articles about the IDPF if you want to know more about that. Or you can email me and we can talk about it.
So I think Cousin Russ shared the link to the Facebook group, your YouTube channel, and I think we have the website link somewhere. You'll get that, Russ.
I'll get them, yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, back to the screen because I want to get to those reports, but we've got another picture to share. Tell me about Frank. What does PTO mean?
Pacific Theater of War.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's my great uncle Frank.
Okay, so he's not freezing his ears off. I can't even. We always think of Italy as so romantic, and we forget that was that cold winter.
Yeah.
And it extended down into the boot.
Mm-hmm.
But here he is, and he served in the Pacific.
Yes.
Okay. And now this one is heartbreaking. Tell me about this.
That is a photo that was provided by the American Battle Monuments Commission when I was writing my book, Stories of the Lost, specifically my cousin James Provoznik's story. And this is an example of Luxembourg Cemetery, Ham Cemetery, where they're doing the final burial and setting up the final resting places for those who are staying in Europe. Mm-hmm. So I don't know who those soldiers are, but I know that, one of them could be my cousin, who knows? But that's an example of what they did at the permanent cemeteries.
So when the body was recovered, the family could elect to have the military bring that soldier's remains home or be buried in Europe in an official cemetery.
Yes, after World War I, during World War I and World War II, when soldiers died overseas, they're buried overseas.
Right.
It wasn't until 1920, after World War I, and 1946, early 1947, after World War II, that families were given the option to repatriate or leave them buried in either the Pacific Theater or the European Theater, or North Africa. Actually, we do have a cemetery there. What a lot of people don't know, and I actually wrote an article about this last fall that kind of stirred some people up. There's a general misconception that the government paid everything to have the soldiers brought home, and that's not accurate. They would pay to repatriate the remains to the US and pay to bury them in a national veteran cemetery. However, if you wanted your son buried in your local Catholic cemetery, you had to pay for that yourself. And the article I wrote talked about, I have a couple IDPFs where the parents are saying, I don't have the money to bury my son, so I have to leave him overseas. And a lot of people didn't like it, and they said money was not an option, but it was.
Yeah.
But for World War I, there are burial files, and for World War II, they're called IDPFs. Actually, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
So that's individual death?
Deceased personnel file.
Oh, deceased personnel file. Okay. You've had to correct me on that a couple of times.
There are a lot of abbreviations to know.
I know Mr. Mert rattles them off too.
That's the military.
Yeah, it's
the military. What do you expect?
Yeah. All right. One thing I just wanted to observe is that you had several different clergymen
Yes.
in addition to the commander and the soldiers that attended, and the flag draped coffins. And flags will also mean something a little bit later in our presentation. But let's look at this next thing. Tell me what this is. Oh, you want to go back?
Yeah, just one. That gentleman with a light uniform just to the left of the flagpole facing is probably a chaplain as opposed to an officer. It's
Okay.
it's going to be a chaplain. If there's clergy, there'll be a chaplain, and they're facing the same direction. So I believe the one on the left is the chaplain.
Thank you for correcting me, because then you have another chaplain. You probably have at least 4 denominations represented there.
Usually, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that clarification, Russ. Okay. But this is the first morning report, and we thought at first that there was something behind these 2 pages, but it's just scratchy, isn't it? It's just like scratchy film.
The morning reports are on microfilm, and some of them look like this, where they're pretty readable. Some of them are illegible. Some of them, as you'll see, just look almost perfect, whether they're typed or handwritten, because they're not all typed. And actually, early morning reports were basically written with a pencil or a fountain pen. But yeah, the examples you'll see are kind of the spectrum of military records, because most military records do not look like they were just printed off a laser printer.
No, I get that. So what have we got for James here?
So my cousin James in the uniform, I started researching him in 2012, and I had his IDPF, that death file, but his service file burned. And I connected with the 90th Infantry Division Association, and they had morning reports. So that was kind of my entry way back when into morning reports. And what we're looking at here is James on the 29th of December moving into F Company of the 358th Infantry Regiment. And down below, where his name is also highlighted, it shows, because the clerk put the information in, and they don't always, if it's a time of high combat, where so many men are moving in and out, killed, missing, prisoner, wounded. But it shows that he was assigned and joined from the 790th Ordnance Light Maintenance on 27 December 1944. So
we've got 2 units now to deal with. Yeah.
So when we talk about the IDPF or the separation and discharge paper where we have a final unit, it's just that. It's only the final unit. Most men and women were in multiple units. So to fully understand their story, you start with that final unit and you work backward through the morning reports. So we know that when James was killed, he was in F Company of the 358th Infantry Regiment. And he was only a rifleman for 14 days because Patton needed replacements. Prior to this, and we see it on the morning report here, he was with the 790th Light Maintenance Ordnance Company. He was with them the other 9 months he was overseas. So for 9 months, he's in relative safety behind the lines, more or less, until the last 14 days of his life, when he has to get the rifle in his hand, go to the front lines, and then he's hit by a high explosive shell. So the morning reports help us work backward.
Okay. And so we could have taken a month's worth of him in the 790th Ordnance, and that wouldn't tell his whole picture. I mean, we'd be excited because we had it, but we really need to look through every morning.
Yes, when you're doing morning report research, you really have to trace the soldier's footsteps. So it's not enough to ask somebody or ask me to pull a whole month's worth of reports, because as we see, it's 29 December and James is coming into F Company of the 358th. If we requested F Company for the whole month, almost all of it doesn't apply to James's service.
Yeah, got it.
So when you're doing this research, you really have to work backward. Now, there are some...
They're filed by unit, right?
Yes, you have to know down to the company, but sometimes just knowing the infantry regiment or the bomb group, there are, not a tremendous amount of squadrons or companies underneath that. So usually we can find the guy relatively easily. But when we have the company, it's even easier and goes even faster.
Okay. Sue has a comment, but while you're working on bringing that up, Russ, I just want to share a little bit more from Shelley. And
Oh, I know him.
you do?
Martine.
Yeah. And he is at the grave of Ralph J. Carter, who is, gee, I can hear some music in the background. Gonna, oh no, this is just music makes me cry.
Yeah, his website has music. He'll be excited that you showed this. I'll have to tell him.
Yes, well, Shelley's attending. She said her relative died during the bombing raid in Marisburg, Germany. He's buried in the American cemetery overseas. He was left overseas, as you'd explained earlier, but his grave was adopted by a now family friend. Here's the link to, yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, he's adopted several graves.
All right, let me stop screen sharing so we can see what Sue has to say.
Sue says, my uncle was in the Navy in the Pacific. My dad was in Italy, Army, Air Force, working on radio installations before D-Day. Would there be morning reports for their stations?
Yeah, for the Army Air Force. The Navy does not have morning reports, but there are a lot of other records that will tell their story.
I would say that the Navy and the other older naval organization has more than one set of reports. I know I kept them for 4 years. So there are all kinds of records. To find them is a different story, but there are all kinds of records that ships will have.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen muster rolls that look like those Civil War type morning reports where who was where, who, you know, who's come in because they were important, 3 guys left and 5 came on board and stuff like that. All right, so let me go back and share my screen so that so we've learned from looking at your cousin James's morning report in this example that we have that looking for a month's worth on Company F wouldn't really have helped us since he only came in on the 29th.
Right.
And but you'd have to look at them all to find this.
Right.
And then we'd know now we have to go look at the 790th and go back that way because they're filed by unit.
Yes.
And then company. Okay, should we go to the next slide?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, it's good. There. Now these are examples of the kind of messy looking ones.
Yes. And this one is for 17 January 1945. Now James was killed on 11 January. And this is a good example of when something happens, the morning reports do not record it the day that it actually happened. It usually shows up within a couple days, although I've seen it show up almost a month later. So when you can't find your soldier listed exactly when something happened, like he was killed on the 11th, if it doesn't show up on the 11th or 12th, you just have to keep going because it will be there at some point.
In a way, obituaries can be that way. Depending on a number of influences. You think it's going to be on a certain day, but maybe that newspaper's only published weekly and you didn't know that. Or it just took them a long time, or they found out he died a certain day, but they didn't get notified, family didn't get notified, and this could be any kind of a death for 2 or 3 or 4 months or a year.
Exactly.
So we're accustomed to that with our obituary research. So let's apply that here in our morning reports. Let's go through this and then we'll take those comments, Russ, okay? Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay. I think we can go to the next screen,
so
I think.
I've zoomed in. This is the full card. And I've
Mm-hmm.
zoomed in. So here's the January 11th or the 17th, but then it mentions him by serial number, his name, his grade, that he died 11th January. And so he got 2 lines that time.
Yeah, and I think somebody asked what the DY to KIA, that's
Yeah.
duty to killed in action, and duty 745 meant he was a rifleman. And that those numbers, 745 or what else you might see, or it might say MOS,
Yeah.
that's the job they did. And if you
Yeah.
Google MOS 745, World War
Yeah.
II, there are several websites that'll tell you exactly what his job was at that time.
They explain that. Okay. Did you want those comments, Russ, or not yet?
It was just one that Betty Lee said, would there be morning reports for a naval base? My father was stationed in Hawaii on land, not ship. There would be records where they are, probably not online. As we're seeing in these examples, these are great detail by person. I know when any time somebody walked across the gangway to go on leave, they were written down in a logbook.
Mm-hmm.
And there was multiple people had logbooks, like the captain. The captain's logbook was different than what the navigator's logbook was. So, but they would contain similar information. Anytime somebody walked out of a gate in Hawaii, off that naval base, there was a record of that. Where that record is probably not online.
As a coastie, you said you have written them for 4 years. What type of a book did you keep, Russ?
The same kind of books that everybody else has. It's a ledger book that was at the station where if I had the quarterdeck watch, anytime somebody came on the ship or left the ship, they're written by name, where they were going, and the time.
Mm-hmm.
The captain would have all kinds of records, navigation records. I saw a website on just before we started on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Welcome. Nobody's going to remember that boat, but it was shot up very badly by friendly forces,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able to recreate the story of that day, that couple of hours, because of the logbooks, even during battle.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's interesting because you've taught me, Jennifer, that these kind of morning reports, like I have on the screen, are
Mm-hmm.
for U.S. Army and Army Air Force.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that the other services had things like Cousin Russ is telling us and providing
Mm-hmm.
firsthand information from his Vietnam service.
Right.
But what we're referring to are these morning reports and showing examples from the Army or Army Air Force.
Right.
Let me bring in True, because she is military.
Okay.
For Army, it was CQ, change of quarters, report log.
Yep. We've got some. Thank you for being here. That's way cool that we're getting this firsthand information from people in the know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now, what is this part? Let's see. Well, is this supposed to be here, or do I have this slide out of order?
I think you can skip to the next one.
Okay. Okay. Oh, this is the flag. Tell us about the flag.
That was the flag that was on James's final casket before he was buried behind me down the hill in that cemetery in Luxembourg. And in 2015, I took a trip to Europe for the first time, and unintentionally, my parents had planned that trip, 3 weeks, 6 countries. I saw 5 minutes of a lot of things. And the end of the trip, I had made arrangements with the cemetery to bring his burial flag to fly it over the cemetery. So we ended up doing that after unintentionally walking in the steps of the 90th Division. That wasn't the intention, but we did it. And
is
the
that
day,
your dad or your mom holding the
no,
Oh,
That's
somebody.
the cemetery assistant superintendent at the time.
Oh, okay, got it.
And after we flew his flag, we folded it back up and she put the other one back up. And then we took Omaha Beach sand down to James's grave and she rubbed it into the lettering because all of the graves are white. So
Yes.
unless you put the sand in there to get a really good picture, it's difficult to
Read the
see what's.
letters.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then the next day, because I have all of these friends in Europe, I met with a couple from Luxembourg who honor the 90th Division, and they took me to the woods where he was killed. So they had done the research too, working with the 90th Division historians and the morning reports and maps and unit records and everything. And then to stand in the woods where he was killed, it
Hmm.
completely changed my life.
Mm-hmm. Totally. You know,
There's an
in our
important point that you just brought up that I think is worth repeating. Every unit either has or has had people doing research for that unit.
Mm-hmm.
And you may find may have difficulty finding it. I know a friend of mine, we both had websites for our ship and we kept the history that we knew. We had people contribute. We put it on our website. Both of us had similar information, but we shared information about our ship. So there are
Mhm.
people who, especially military, and they won't talk about it in public or in to spouses. They won't talk about it, but they've done it somewhere. You just got to know where to look.
Right.
Now, the people that you're talking about that you met with
Mm-hmm.
are residents of that area
Yes.
who are descendants of people that were liberated.
Yes.
And they are, it's, it is something very deep rooted and patriotic and respectful because these descendants realize they are able to walk and go where they wish
Yes.
because of the liberation of the
Mm-hmm.
Allied forces and the
Yes.
sacrifices that were made. So how very kind of them to have taken you to the actual place where your
Yes.
cousin died.
And there are a lot of researchers in Europe and a lot of them who adopt graves. And when we were at Roots Tech, you met Johan, my husband, who adopted 2
Mm-hmm.
graves at Margraten.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think most Americans realize just how much the Europeans honor not only our veterans who show up over there, but the guys who died,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and often the grave adopters and the reenactors and the groups that just do maybe unit research often know more about our soldiers than the families here do.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's a really good idea to try and connect with those people. And they're all over Facebook. A lot of them, like Martine, have websites, you know, so it's a really good idea to check them out.
You know, it's like when I lived in Manatee County, Florida, I got active in the Genealogy Society and I became very active in the Historical Society,
Mm-hmm.
preserving the history of that area. Well, Manatee County, Florida didn't have a battle there, but you know, they have they do reenactment things where they once a year dress up and they're at the Gamble Mansion and they show what implements were used in that time period, and they can tell you where people moved in from
Mm-hmm.
in the 1700s, things like that. This is what people are doing. It's a component of that type
Mm-hmm.
of interest in history combined with that reverence and respect for
Exactly.
their ancestors' lives having been preserved and their way of
Mm-hmm.
life having been preserved. So cool.
Exactly.
Okay, shall we go look at the next page?
Okay.
I hope I can get through the slides here. I have my Kleenex, but anyway, we're good. So what is this kind of morning report? It's a little bit easier to read. We've zoomed in on it. So
This is for a company of the 92nd Chemical Mortar Battalion.
mm-hmm,
And a little background on this before we go to the next slide. When I had a client whose father was in this unit, and I did a little research, and online there was a website for the 92nd, and somebody had posted that a veteran had written a letter saying, oh, we came aboard we came on the beach on D-Day with the 1st Infantry Division. You know, the chemical battalions were attached to different divisions at different times.
Mm-hmm.
And everything I was finding for the 92nd said they didn't come in until the end of June. So we have to be careful, you know, when we look at things we find online or we listen to veteran stories, we need to remember that sometimes facts get mixed up or memories blur. And actually, what I did end up researching that veteran to see what was going on with his story on the website. And he probably did come in on D-Day, but with a different unit. He wasn't put into the 92nd until early January 1945 as a replacement. So I think in his mind, yes, he was on Omaha Beach on D-Day, but he wasn't with the 92nd. And when you look at the morning reports for the 92nd, it tells you they were on a ship waiting to cross the channel, and then the storm came, and then they had to wait some more to get off the ships later June. So all of that stuff is documented here. And with this one, you know, we're looking at where they are, Aldenhoven. And if you go to the next slide, what I like to do with these morning reports is I create the client report showing where their father, grandfather, whoever I'm working on. You know, I go to Google Maps and number one, see if I can find the town, because the morning reports don't always have the town spelled correctly. So you have to take a look at what's on Google Maps. And what's good is usually the report writer will say, we marched or went by motor, you know, 10 miles today. So if you can't quite find the town and you have where they were before and you know kind of where they're going, you can look at Google Maps to figure out
it's
maybe
probably
what the
this
town.
place, because they said at the 8-mile marker they crossed a stream or something. Yeah.
Right. But when we look at unit records, which sometimes you have to do if you just can't find what the towns are actually called or spelled, because sometimes they're just butchered. This is an example of a company, 92nd Chemical Mortar Battalion, where they were, the places that they went, and the towns are spelled correctly. So this is like a next step after you've done the research out of St. Louis, unit records, finding maps, unit histories, all of that. But this also gives you, with the morning reports, a visual of where they were, where the major rivers were that they had to cross. It's a really good piece to add to the history.
It's a beautiful map. I agree with Sue on that. Okay, now I've tried to zoom in, and that means I've cut off some of the bottom of this.
That's okay.
So that we could see them. This was the full thing just to show you. What are we looking at now?
Well, this is for a tank battalion that I worked on last year, and I've noticed that the tank battalions and the armored infantry battalions tend to have much more information under the record of events. And the record of events was the area on the report where they were supposed to give a brief synopsis of what happened that day. So maybe they marched 10 miles, or maybe they joined up or were attached to another unit for a certain time period. But with the tank battalions and the armored infantry, sometimes we get more detail. And this report describes a tank crew sitting in the dark on the side of the road as the Germans march down the road, having this kind of party, if you read everything that's happening here.
Yes, in the dark.
Yeah.
And they never saw them.
They never saw them. And I just think, oh my gosh, I would be scared out of my mind sitting there listening to what's being described in this morning report as the Germans march past, wondering if they're going to find us. And, you know, it gives you chills and really puts you in that tank.
Oh, I know. It'd be, you know, it's like when you're in a submarine and you don't breathe, because any, you know, the slightest little noise could set off the radar on the enemy. And it's about the same for those tanks. I haven't been in a tank, but it isn't like they have sound muffling insulation. It's metal. And that is a great conductor of sound. So it sounds like the Germans in this case were really partying it up and totally oblivious to the world around them.
Exactly.
Oh
and
my gosh.
It's nice that they mention some of the names, even if they don't give first names. You know, if sometimes you can Google some of these people and see what else you know, they might have written something else, or maybe they're part of a reunion association or something. And then maybe you can connect with them and learn just a little bit more about what happened in that company.
Yes. And how it was resolved with the fragmentation grenade.
Right. And I think, did I send you the next page for that?
I think page 3 I have. Yeah, here's
Okay.
page 3. They were on the ground moaning, 6 soldiers, and then he moved the tank. Throwing shells.
Sue asked the question, why restricted? And I believe that was a designation at the time and has since been removed.
Yes, and sometimes you'll see secret across the top of some of the reports, secret or restricted. Yeah.
And they've since been made available.
Declassified.
Yes. That's the word, yes. Wow. Lieutenant Halford's driver promptly came up through the driver's hatch with his submachine gun firing in charge of bazooka man. He disposed of him. What a brave person that driver was. The unfortunate part was that he was mistaken for a German by an infantryman, and that man was shot. This in the fog of war.
Right. So many things happen.
Wow, it does. I agree with Sherry, who says this is incredible. Really helps to put yourself in the moment with them. Oh my heavens. Okay, now this is a different morning report. Talk to us about this one.
This one is in the Philippines for the 108th Infantry Regiment, and it's an example that shows some very nice handwriting and that not all the morning reports were typed. So it just gives you some basic details. And this one shows a lot of who's coming in and out, you know, where they're being reassigned. So you can kind of, you know, like Rotman just right there.
Yeah.
He's reassigned from the 127th General Hospital. So it's possible he was a patient there. Now he's coming back.
Recuperated, yeah.
You'll see promotions in here. And then the record of events you see is very small. So, you know, not all reports are the same. And the men who wrote the reports, again, if it was a time of high combat, you'll be lucky to get the information on the guys and what was going on, and maybe no record of events.
And maybe you'll get it later.
Sometimes you do, yes, as we'll see coming up.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I wish my handwriting or printing was that neat. Okay, now we have another one. We're back to, where are we?
We're back, yes, and we're in the 51st Armored Infantry Battalion, and these are some of the ones that I was showing yesterday. And some of these go for 5 or 6 pages. And one thing we have to remember is if we read this one, we have to keep things in historical context. And I think a discussion came up on Facebook recently, in the last few days, about the terms that people used at certain times. And if you read this report, the Germans are referred to as Jerry's, Huns, the Bosch, and there's one other, I think it's on the next page, but basically every way, Jerry's, I already said that. Basically any way that the Germans were referred to by the GIs in World War II is in this morning report for the 24th of September. And if you look at it, under record of events, it starts with 17 September 1944. So probably what happened is they're on the move, there's a lot of combat, a lot of things are happening, and the report writer doesn't have time to sit and get it all done. So by 24 September, he has time to sit and write the reports, and now he's backdating everything.
This is 20th September. This is 18th, etc. I see that comment. I think the next page we need to go to, but I think the important part you're trying to show us here is, remember, those were the terms that were being used at the time.
Right.
They didn't have that thought of being politically correct as we are concerned about now. And when you transcribe it, you're transcribing it word for word.
Yes. And one other thing to mention, because we love source citations, that when when I create a timeline of service for a soldier, whether I do it in a table or I do it as a narrative, when I source where everything came from, when I, let's say for this one of the soldiers in this unit for 17 September, when I put in that record of events for the 17th, I'm going to footnote it as being on the company morning report for Headquarters Company, 51st Armored Infantry Battalion, dated 24 September 1944.
Because that's when he got around to making this entry.
Exactly. And then, of course, National Personnel Record Center, St. Louis, you know, but.
This is, yeah, so this is what, that's how it would have been filed in chronological order. And when you're going through these, you're looking at that top line there for that date, like the 29th of December for your cousin. But in this case, once you get into the record of events itself, he's rehashing the 17th, then the 18th.
Yeah, and not all units do that. For the 5th Division, I've done a lot of research on them in the last year. And when they were really on the move and dealing with a lot of combat, they would backdate a lot of things, and it almost gets a little bit confusing. So you really have to be patient and careful and just source everything, because you can make a typing error as you're creating your notes and then wonder, where did I get that information? Source everything as you go along.
Okay, Russ, so I'm ready to take the comment. Do you want me to screen share so you can do that? I'll take your cue, just a minute. All right, go ahead.
True says, I'm so excited to find out that his experience and compare it to what he told me about World War II and the colored troop. We rarely hear about their stories in the moment like this. Wow. He always animated when he talked about his experience like it was yesterday. These reports look like the meat on the bones, besides the personal soldier account, for very detailed. And there's one little common sense thing to me, that you're seeing what you've shared with us all typed. Where is that typewriter? How's that typewriter going to get from where it was to where it is now? So there'll be, what you told us is reality, but what the person was who wrote that, who typed that, what that person was going through, and that is carrying a typewriter. But the good news is that was his job, that he had to do that for the unit.
Right. And when you talk about that, we have to remember it wasn't only the fire in 1973 that destroyed records. When these records were on a truck or a ship or an airplane, you know, however they're being transported, if that is hit by artillery, a bomb, it's sunk in the ocean, those records are gone. And sometimes in more of the unit records and the unit histories, if the records don't exist because of a fire on a ship, or the ship sunk, or a place was blown up, they will usually try to recreate what they can, and they'll say, you know, the original records from this date to this date for these units were destroyed in a fire on the ship. So we have to remember, and the same thing goes with personal effects for soldiers that died. You know, if they're lost or they're on one of these ships or things that gets blown up or sunk, those are reasons that those things get lost too. So we have to keep that in mind.
Okay.
Let me give you a real-time example, a real experience. I was on board a ship off the coast of Vietnam. We were getting replenishment at sea by helicopters. That was what we were doing. We were taking on food and all the stuff that we took. All of a sudden, those helicopters left us, dead in the water. Now, that's what we would have recorded and did record in a ship's log. It wasn't until later that we found out why those helicopters left us. And that's on another ship that in fact was an aircraft carrier that had a plane blow up on the side of that aircraft carrier and had a fire. So it wasn't until years later that I found out that we were getting The helicopters were with us, left us to go to the aircraft carrier where McCain was on when his plane exploded. So,
Mhm.
I mean, there's two stories, but it wasn't until later that we were able to put them together.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. I have just now heard more from Cousin Russ about his Vietnam experience in just this hour than I have all the times of knowing and caring for this man, working together as we do. Let's
Mhm.
go to the next page.
Okay.
Now we're up to the 19th. It still says the 24th across the top, but there's
Mhm.
the 19th of September, and then taken to CCB for interrogation. Yeah, so that's the continuation of this date, the 19th, that they're reporting on. Yes,
Yes.
Russ? You want to say something?
Yeah, look at the column headers and look at what's below the column headers. The column headers are looking for information about a person, but the data that we're looking at is not about a person, is what the events were taken at. So that was a form that somebody had to fill out, but they were just reusing one form to do something else.
Mhm.
Good observation. Yeah, this I wish we had. This is the thing I can relate to this. Cousin Russ, when we went to Gettysburg and we had our private tour, and Gordon had in advance asked for somebody who knew your guys' unit history and knew my guys' unit history. Because we thought we were on Culp's Hill at the same time, possibly fighting each other. And it's so good. We've made amends after hundreds of all these decades. Because that man who got in Mr. Mert's truck and drove us around he knew that unit history and had studied it. He could give us what these morning reports could have been giving us if we had that for Gettysburg, for the 19th Indiana, and your fellow from Maryland. Wow. Okay. Anything to
So
say on this? Go ahead.
yes, with this 51st Armored, a lot of the reports, if you look on the 19th September down a few lines, it says issue of wine. Often in these reports, it would say issue of wine or fresh beef and bread today, or 1 bottle of cognac for every 10 men or something. So we're getting a little more about what they're eating, what they're drinking, which you don't usually see in these reports. So again, every report is not created the same. And then down on the bottom of the second page, it says awarding of Bronze Star and Purple Hearts, going on to the next page. So we know that some of the men are receiving awards that day. And what's interesting about these is, for this one, and I've got 2 years worth of these reports to work with for this client. The clerk does a great job of putting all of this record of events, but there's not so much about the men coming in and out on a lot of the different pages, which is a little bit unusual.
So his thing was the history and not the people.
He does put the people in, but he puts a lot of history. And sometimes I wonder, well, when they talk about, like on the right side, the casualties continue to be heavy, C Company was hit. And I wonder, okay, well, who were the casualties? And so we have to, move forward in the days and look and see at what point does he list them as lightly wounded in action or killed in action or whatever that is.
There is one hint to that, is what was the person's job doing this? Because I mentioned where I signed people on and off the ship, somebody else is writing. This person was to record the history for what was going on so they could pass it up the line. But somebody else is doing the who's coming and who's going. So what was the job of the person who is writing this report?
The morning reports are supposed to have the information about the guys, any change that happened, whether they're moving in or out, they're changing rank, they're changing jobs, they're sick, they're wounded, any of that. But in this particular set of reports, there's less of that and more of the history. But as we saw,
But what I think that you will find another set of company reports for this same time period for the same unit.
No, it's this one. This is all there is.
Okay,
Okay. That's too
I'm
bad.
looking at the column headers on the report,
Yeah.
and what's on the data that tells me that there's somebody else should have been doing the comings and goings of the.
Yes.
This
They
is not
are,
just
no, they are in here, but for 24 September, typically when you write a morning report, you put the information about the guys first, and then you type record of events. And then usually it's just a few lines. But in this particular company, they put a little bit about what's happening, and then the record of events just goes on and on and on and on.
Well,
So
and
it's all one guy, all one set of reports for this company. There isn't anything else, but this is
there's
an extreme
rumors being
example.
mentioned. There's
Yeah.
rumors being mentioned. We heard the 35th Division was cut off from us. And that's got to be noted, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure everybody in the unit heard about that rumor because
Right.
you had other buddies over there
Mm-hmm.
and you're concerned for them. Yeah. Dropping shells in the battalion area. All vehicles camouflaged, informed there was enemy air activity. All anti-aircraft guns were mounted on ground mounts ready for immediate use if necessary, and that they were cleaning up, wrapping parcels for mailing, hanging out clothing for drying. Yeah.
This company just really, I can't, so many of the pages for the 2 years look like this. Again, there is some information about the guys, but they just recorded a huge amount of detail like I've never seen, even in those tank battalions before. That was nothing. I thought that was amazing, but this just goes over the top.
You know what else is amazing? I don't see a lot of typos, or where they went back and typed another letter 3 times over one of them.
Yeah.
That's very good typing. But anyway, okay. Okay, Russ has a comment. Let me get that over to you, Russ. You're muted, dear.
Rose says, I had an uncle who was a POW. Was there any morning reports on that too? I'm going to guess they are, that somebody's POW, if Civil War records, Mert, that you talked about earlier, they were missing. 3 days later, you find out they were in the hospital or they went home, they were deserted, but then they came back because their wife was having a kid.
What do you think, Jennifer?
When someone became a POW, they are listed on the morning reports as either, they might be listed as missing at first if it's not known that they were taken prisoner. So their status could go from duty to missing, and then missing to POW, or it could go from duty to POW. And then once they're POW, they're dropped from that morning report.
And it isn't like the enemy gave them paper and typewriter to do their own morning reports.
No.
So then you're stuck with praying that somebody who was in that same camp wrote about it later when they were freed.
When they are taken as a prisoner of war, they're supposed to, the Germans, if we want to talk about the European theater, kept records. So everybody was logged, and they all had a card. They should usually have a picture with the card, and then they would often be transferred from camp to camp to camp.
What have you got, Russ?
This is a telegram that was sent to my great aunt when my great uncle, her husband, was made a POW. That's the telegram. In a book, it's a telegram that home that he was a POW.
So it was a notification that she received that he was now a POW.
Right.
Oh man, so prayers changed. I mean, you had prayers anyway, but that was big change in prayers at that point. Oh dear. Did he get to come home, Russ?
After he was captured a second time as a POW, yes. And then the night that his daughter was going to be married, the neighbor came and shot him. And there's a book.
Yeah, that was a
Oh,
very, very,
And
that's who we're talking about.
you talked about the pictures, and in this book, there are pictures that they got from probably the same kind of reports that you were talking about, pictures of the unit
mm-hmm.
that are all labeled that were men that were prisoners. So knowing my aunt, the lady who was going to get married, or my cousin, that she probably got those records from the same place where you visited.
Mhm. Okay, I think we only have a couple more slides, and we've only gone a few minutes over, so we're doing really well because this has been quite an interesting meeting tonight. Tell me a little bit. Oh, this is page 4, and we're still in France with the 51st Armored Infantry.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting on this is near the bottom of that page, it says, rumor has it that the 10 enemy who surrendered killed their officers and surrendered.
Oh,
How
that's
often do we
interesting.
hear that?
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah.
Wow. That's an interesting thing. All right,
Mm-hmm.
shall we go to our last slide? And then I'm going to show them your website and we'll call, oh, we're to this part.
Okay.
So I wanted to toot Jennifer's horn here and tell you about the books that she writes. They are pathways to accomplishing this research on your own, finding the answers about what you can online, what you need to do to consider hiring a lookup person or a researcher with the kind of research that Jennifer does. Need somebody. Let me pull up that blog post that you did recently. I have it here. It's on my Wacky Wednesday Trello card. Somewhere here, theoretically, possibly. Where would I find that? Since I can't seem to find that particular article that you wrote. Darn it! Is it over on Facebook or is it here on your blog?
It's under latest article on the website.
Okay, I'm on
So
your
down,
website.
so if you just move down to the middle underneath the scrolling thing that's going
Oh
across.
yeah, latest
Yeah.
article.
Yeah.
Oh, when not to hire a genealogy or military record retrieval person. That's a lookup person, right?
Yes.
And versus a full service researcher. What does a full service researcher do?
Full service, this is what I do. And we obtain various records for the client, and it's all specific to what their questions are,
Mm-hmm.
what their project goals are. So it isn't that I'm going to go and pull 1 month of morning reports, or I'm only going to pull their death file. It's much more customized to what they need. So, for one client, we might get 5 or 6 different records to start with. For another, we might get 10 different records to start
Mm-hmm.
with. And it also varies by military branch. I use those records to create a timeline of service, provide a full research report that documents all of that. We do unit research to get more of the contextual information. Everything is source cited. They get copies of everything. Often I'm able to connect people with researchers in Europe or other historians who are the experts of whatever unit they're working on. And a lot of my clients are now traveling in Europe to walk in their father or grandfather's footsteps. So while I am not a travel agent, I do not have those licenses or insurance or any of that. I work with Terry O'Connell,
Mm-hmm.
and but I can help people, by saying, well, if you're going here, there are some great places to stay, or I know a researcher there who can show you where your father was wounded. Let them have that experience, because it is very powerful. So that's kind of what a full service researcher could do, as
Mm-hmm.
compared to a record retriever who you're going to pay to go get a certain kind of record.
Certain paperwork.
Right.
That you are uniquely poised to do this and are sensitive to these things because you have a international marriage.
Yes.
Multiple continents are involved here. So you're back and forth to Europe several times a year,
Yes.
not just because of your marriage, but because you are invited to speak over there, and your
Yes.
books are very popular over in Europe as well.
Yes.
And I think what you like to do, it's something like David Renter likes to do. He's used to be the chief genealogy officer at Family Search. Now they've made him director of the Family History Library, but he's an expert on Irish research.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants you to take an institute class from him before you go with him to Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't want to just feed you information. He wants to help you have a successful experience when you go
Right.
across. Thank you, Cousin Russ, for sharing the link to World War II education articles, and I've highlighted the one on company morning reports. There's that term IDPF,
Mm-hmm.
individual deceased personnel files. I got it right. Yes, I got it.
And if people want to see examples of some of these records, if they go under research on the website, then there are World War I record examples, World War II record examples, you know, so people can take a look at these different kinds of files.
Yeah, that if you know, if, I didn't know you could get morning reports like this.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm kind of curious to do it.
Right.
And although my father served stateside, I'd really like, my Uncle Jack was in the Navy. And yeah, they're not as exciting as what we've looked at this evening for the now again, it was U.S. Army and Army Air Force that we see these more rich morning reports, but you don't know if you're going to find it till you look.
Right.
And good. Is there anything else I forgot to mention, Russ, from my notes over in Trello?
I don't think so. My only suggestion, in addition to what you've talked about and where to go, is that if the branch of the service has a college or academy, or go visit their website, because a lot of times you'll find records on the websites, like the Coast Guard Academy, like the Air Force Academy, like the Naval Academy, like West Point. There's a ton of stuff that you can find on those websites that will help you understand more about what you're looking at here. I have several. The gentleman whose book I showed, his two sons went to West Point. I have visited West Point several times, so they have great resources to look at that will help you understand some of these records, or they may have some themselves.
And you bring up a really great point there, describing where these other records are, because what I give you through what I teach or my books or on the website are the basics to get you from starting in St. Louis, whether any military branch, to College Park, Maryland, where the unit records are. That's your starting point. But military records are scattered all over the country. They're in presidential libraries. They're in the military libraries and the schools. They're in small ethnic museums where you wouldn't think they would exist. They're everywhere, and there's no master list. So you have to really start with creating that timeline of service and knowing where your guy was, no matter what branch he was in, and then start looking at all of these other places, and then Europe or the Pacific, because there are records and resources and archives over there too.
Dr. Shelley says museums for the units is another place.
Right.
Let me ask you a question. Suppose you have somebody like me that likes to do the lookup and the research. Could I hire you to consult with me and say, okay, go do these, try these next 3 things?
Yes.
But it'll be quicker if we have this guy here in St. Louis pull this for you.
Yes.
Based on what my goals are. Can I hire you that way?
Yes, I work with all kinds of clients, and like I said, every project is customized based on what they need.
Okay.
It's not a, click and this is all you can get. It's everybody is custom.
I especially like your writing capability.
Thank you.
And every time I've attended an event where you were speaking, you had the audience in tears in the first 2 minutes, um, because we want to relate to
Right.
our ancestors who served during the war times that you have developed an expertise with. And thank you for being with us tonight. It's been quite illuminating.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having me.
All right, Cousin Russ, anything from the community, or are we doing okay?
We're good.
We're good. Okay. Well, folks, there's nothing left to say, but I'm Dear Myrtle, your friend in genealogy. Happy family tree climbing, everybody. That's a wrap.